My name is Clark Miller, and I never thought the words of my own daughter would cut deeper than any stranger's insult. One spring afternoon, she looked me in the eye and said, "Either serve my husband or leave." I had paid for her college, her wedding, even the roof over her head. Yet in that moment, I was reduced to a servant in my own home. What they didn't know was that my silence wasn't surrender. It was the beginning of their undoing. Because when a man who has sacrificed everything is finally pushed too far, he learns that dignity is worth more than money, and the truth can turn a family upside down. Before we begin, I'd like to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. I still remember the exact moment it happened, the words that split my life in two. Either serve my husband or leave. My daughter Tiffany didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough hard, cold, and distant, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience in the house I had built with my own two hands. The insult stung deeper than anything I had endured at the bank in my 30 years of work, deeper even than the quiet loneliness after my wife Martha passed. But this wasn't a stranger humiliating me. This was my own flesh and blood. I had just come through the front door, grocery bags digging into my wrists, milk sweating through the thin plastic. The afternoon sun painted the living room golden, a light that once filled me with warmth. But that day the glow only exposed the ugliness sitting in my recliner. Harry, my son-in-law, sprawled out with his dirty socks on Martha's last gift to me, a beer dangling from his hand. Without even glancing away from the basketball game, he barked, "Grab me another beer while you're up. Corona. Not that cheap stuff." The words landed heavy. I'd bought those Coronas with my Social Security money, beer I would never touch, just to keep peace in this house. My hands trembled as I set the groceries down the plastic handles, leaving red welts across my palms. "Harry, I just walked in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to put these away." That's when he looked at me with that smug expression, the one I'd seen too many times. "What's the big deal? You're already standing." "I'm comfortable." He rose, slowly looming over me, his size meant to intimidate. "Look, old man, you want to keep living here. Then you play by my rules. Simple." The kitchen door creaked open. Tiffany stepped in, towel in hand, her blonde hair pulled back the way Martha used to wear it on busy mornings. For a second I hoped she would see the scene for what it was, but she only sighed as if I were the problem. "Dad, just get him the beer. It's not worth fighting over." Not worth fighting over. Those words pierced more than Harry's arrogance. My daughter had once clung to me during thunderstorms, whispering she felt safe in my arms. Now she stood beside her husband, telling me to bow down in my own home. Harry smirked, certain of his victory. He thought he'd broken me. But inside something shifted. The man they thought would always bend, always sacrifice, finally felt the lines snap. I straightened my shoulders, my voice calm but unshakable. "All right," I said. Harry leaned back smug, waiting for me to shuffle into the kitchen like a beaten servant. Instead, I looked him square in the eye and added, "I'll pack." His smirk froze. Tiffany's mouth opened in shock. They expected me to break down, to beg for forgiveness. Instead, I chose dignity. And in that moment, none of them realized they had just set into motion the unraveling of everything they depended on. I walked down the hallway with the steady thud of my shoes against the hardwood Martha and I had refinished 20 years earlier. Each sound echoed in my ears like a drumbeat of finality. In my bedroom, the air smelled faintly of cedar from the old wardrobe, a scent that once reminded me of stability. Now it carried only sorrow. I reached up to the closet shelf and pulled down the suitcase I had bought decades ago for our honeymoon to Yellowstone. Back then, it had been filled with promise and excitement. Now it waited to swallow the fragments of a life I had built only to see dismantled by entitlement. I began packing slowly, methodically. Socks, shirts, 2 pairs of pants. My hands moved with practiced care, but my mind replayed every sacrifice I had made for Tiffany. I saw myself signing the tuition checks, $40,000 a year, working late nights at the bank just to cover her dreams. I remembered the day she came home with glossy magazines filled with wedding dresses, her eyes sparkling with hope. 25,000 later, she walked down the aisle in a gown I could barely afford, but couldn't deny her. I remembered the night she called crying, worried she and Harry couldn't qualify for a mortgage. Without hesitation, I drained $80,000 from my retirement account for their down payment. I told myself it was what fathers did. Martha would have wanted her little girl to have a stable home. From there, the bleeding never stopped. $1,200 a month for the mortgage, $300 for utilities, $500 for groceries when money ran short. My Social Security check became theirs. Each time I convinced myself it was love. Each time I chipped away a little more of my future. As I folded the last shirt, I slipped a framed photo of Martha into the side pocket, wrapping it gently in tissue paper. Her smile, frozen in time, reminded me of a woman who believed in giving but also believed in respect. She would have been heartbroken to see Tiffany stand against me, choosing a man like Harry over her own father. Outside the door, I heard hushed whispers. Tiffany's voice sharp with panic. Harry's low and angry, arguing over what to do now that I was no longer playing their game. For years, they had assumed I would never walk away, that I was too soft-hearted, too dependent on family bonds to leave. They never realized that family bonds cut both ways, and theirs had already frayed beyond repair. When I rolled the suitcase into the hallway, Tiffany stood there, her arms crossed. Her eyes were cold, so different from the little girl who once climbed onto my lap to hide from thunder. "Dad, wait," she whispered. But it wasn't the kind of plea born of love. It was fear of what my leaving truly meant. I didn't answer. I walked past her, my footsteps steady, my heart heavy. As the suitcase wheels bumped against the front step, I caught a glimpse of Harry sitting stiffly in the recliner, beer bottle, untouched. His smirk finally gone. They had expected me to fold. Instead, I chose freedom. And none of them realized that by pushing me out, they had just lost the one person keeping their lives from collapsing. The Pine Lodge Motel wasn't much to look at from the outside. A flickering neon sign buzzed above the office door, half the letters dim, and the paint on the siding had long since given up its fight with the Montana winters. But when I opened the door to my room, a strange peace settled over me. The space was small, just a double bed, a chair, and a chipped nightstand, but it was mine. No raised voices, no demands, no son-in-law barking orders like a drill sergeant in his own fantasy of control. Just silence. I set the suitcase on the luggage rack and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The springs groaned beneath me, but I welcomed the sound. It reminded me I was free of the house that had turned into a cage. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts, banks, insurance companies, credit cards. 30 years at the bank had made me fluent in financial systems, and I knew exactly where to start cutting the cords. But first I opened the side pocket of my suitcase. Martha's photo peeked out from its wrapping. Her smile steadied me. "I hope you'd understand," I whispered into the quiet room. "I can't let them treat me like this. Not after all we gave." I imagined her nodding the way she used to when she believed in a hard choice I had to make. That memory carried me forward. Dinner was a burger from the diner down the street. The waitress, a young woman with freckles, asked if I was passing through. I almost laughed. Just staying a while, I said. She didn't need to know my family had cast me out. As I ate, I realized how long it had been since I'd bought a meal just for myself, without worrying if Tiffany and Harry had enough in the fridge. For the first time in years, I tasted freedom in something as simple as ketchup and fries. Back at the motel, I opened my laptop on the tiny table by the window. The screen's glow lit up the stack of documents I'd spread across the surface: bank statements, insurance policies, credit card bills. They had bled me dry for years, every check I signed feeding their comfort. But tonight, the tide would turn. I logged into my accounts, my fingers steady on the keyboard. The first step was to cancel the automatic mortgage payment. For 5 years, $200 had been siphoned off every month without a word of gratitude. That ended tonight. My chest tightened as I clicked cancel, but then it loosened. One chain broken. Next came the car insurance. Harry's Silverado and Tiffany's Honda were both under my policy. $208 each month for vehicles I never drove. A quick call to the agent, polite but firm, and that cord snapped too. By midnight, I had drafted a plan. Each debt, each bill, each leech attached to my accounts would be cut off. Tomorrow, I would start making the calls. Tonight, I slept in a motel bed that sagged in the middle, but I slept as a free man. They thought pushing me out was their victory. They didn't know they had just handed me the power to unravel every piece of the life they took for granted. Sunday morning dawned gray and cold, a sky heavy with the kind of clouds that press down on your chest. I brewed the motel's bitter coffee, sat at the little table by the window, and spread out my papers like a general laying out a battle plan. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about keeping the peace. I was thinking about justice, quiet, methodical justice. The first call was the hardest. I dialed the number for First National Bank, the same place I had worked most of my career, the same institution that had once been my second home. A cheerful, automated voice guided me through options until a young representative finally picked up. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. How can I help you today? I need to cancel an automatic mortgage payment," I said firmly, giving the account number I knew by heart. There was a pause, the kind where you could hear the clerk's surprise through the line. "Sir, that payment has been active for 5 years. Are you certain you want to discontinue it?" "Completely certain. And may I ask the reason? The homeowners no longer qualify for my assistance." My voice didn't shake. It was the truth, plain and simple. A few keystrokes later, the representative confirmed the cancellation. A weight I didn't realize I was carrying slid off my shoulders. That was $200 back in my pocket each month, and a rude awakening for Tiffany and Harry. The next call came easier. Geico. I explained that 2 vehicles needed to be removed from my policy: Harry's truck and Tiffany's Honda. The agent tried to upsell me on coverage changes, but I cut him off politely. "They're not my responsibility anymore. Today it ends." Another cord severed. Then came the credit cards. For years, Tiffany had been an authorized user, swiping her way through life on my Visa MasterCard and even my Costco card. I listened as the representative explained that balances would remain my responsibility, but no new charges could be made. That was enough. No more weekend shopping sprees disguised as emergencies. By the time I hung up, my notebook was filled with confirmation numbers, dates, and reference codes. The paper trail of my independence. I leaned back in the motel chair, exhaling long and slow. Each call was more than a financial adjustment. It was a declaration I would no longer bankroll their arrogance. But I knew it wouldn't take long for them to notice. Tiffany would see the mortgage bounce, Harry would panic when the insurance lapsed, and the credit cards would suddenly decline at the register. That was when the real storm would hit. I closed the notebook, glanced out the window at the parking lot, where an old couple loaded their car. They moved in quiet rhythm, helping each other with small gestures. It reminded me of Martha and the life we had built before everything soured. That memory fueled me. This wasn't revenge born of anger. It was survival born of dignity. And tomorrow, they would finally understand what it meant when the Bank of Dad closed its doors for good. By Wednesday, my phone looked like a storm warning. 12 missed calls stacked one after another, Tiffany's name flashing again and again across the screen. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I let the messages pile up, each voicemail another brick in the wall of consequences they had built for themselves. The first few messages almost sounded casual. Dad, hey, the bank said something about a payment not going through. Must be a glitch, right? Can you call me back? Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had never once imagined the safety net could vanish. By the fourth message, the tone had shifted. Dad, the mortgage company is saying we owe the full amount by Friday. Did you change something? We don't have that kind of money. Please call me. There was fear now, a quiver beneath her words. Harry's voice soon replaced hers, sharp, aggressive, dripping with entitlement. Clark, you need to fix this. The insurance lapsed and people are asking questions. You're making us look like deadbeats. Get it sorted. Not once did he say please. Not once did he admit I'd already done more than any father should. By the eighth message, Tiffany was crying. Dad, I don't know what's happening. Harry's furious. The credit cards aren't working either. I can't even buy groceries. Please just tell me what's going on. I closed my eyes, hearing the desperation that once would have broken me, driven me to open my wallet no matter the cost. But this time I felt only clarity. I remembered Martha's words during hard times. Love doesn't mean carrying someone while they cut away at your legs. It means walking side by side. For 5 years I had carried them both, sacrificing piece after piece of my future, and in return, they had handed me an ultimatum: serve or leave. Now they were stumbling under their own weight, and I no longer rushed to hold them up. The final messages came late Friday night. Harry's voice unsteady, more desperate than angry. Clark, listen, maybe we started off wrong. I know I said things I shouldn't have. We can work this out. Just call me back, all right? Don't do this to Tiffany. He tried to sound calm, but underneath it was panic. The kind of panic that comes when a man realizes the ground beneath him is crumbling. I pressed delete after each message. No anger, no satisfaction. Just quiet resolve. The motel room was silent except for the faint hum of the old air conditioner, and for the first time in years I felt no obligation weighing on me. They had wanted me out of the house. They had wanted me silent and compliant. They got their wish. But they also got something they never expected: a man who would no longer be their lifeline. And as I set my phone aside, I knew this was only the beginning. Their real education hadn't even started yet. The following week, I stopped by the Main Street diner for a cup of coffee, trying to settle into a new rhythm of solitude. The place smelled of bacon grease and strong brew, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes and reminded you of small-town America. I had just slid into a corner booth when a familiar voice called my name. Clark Miller. Well, I'll be damned. I looked up to see Bob Harrison, an old colleague from my banking days. We had worked side by side for more than a decade before his transfer to the main branch. He carried a folded newspaper under his arm and the same no-nonsense expression that had made him one of the sharpest loan officers I ever knew. He slid into the seat across from me without waiting for an invitation. "Good to see you, Bob," I said, offering a handshake. His grip was firm, but his eyes studied me, curious. "Heard you've been staying out at Pine Lodge." "Everything all right?" I hesitated. Family situation. Needed some space. Bob nodded slowly, then leaned in, lowering his voice. Clark, I've got to tell you something. That son-in-law of yours tried to pull a fast one a few months back. Walked into the bank claiming your house was his. He applied for a home equity loan, 50 grand. The words froze me mid-sip. My house. That's right. Brought in paperwork and everything. Looked official at first glance. But when we ran the title search, it all came back clean. Your name, your signature, no co-signers. The documents he gave us were forged. Clark, deliberate fraud. I set the coffee cup down carefully, my hands steady only because of years of practice. Inside, a cold anger spread through me. It wasn't enough that Harry had disrespected me, in my own living room demanded beer like I was his servant, or pressured Tiffany into siding with him. Months before that scene, he had already been plotting to steal from me. When was this? I asked quietly. December, maybe January. I handled the application myself, rejected it on the spot, flagged his information, and kept copies. Technically, since no money exchanged hands, it's a gray area legally. But Clark, this wasn't a mistake. He knew exactly what he was doing. Bob's voice lowered even more. Word is Harry's got gambling debts, big ones. That loan was his lifeline. I leaned back against the vinyl booth, my mind spinning. The ultimatum he'd given me, serve him or leave, suddenly made perfect sense. It had never been about respect or control. It was about access. He needed me under his thumb so he could bleed me dry, or worse, manipulate his way into stealing the very roof over my head. I thanked Bob, shaking his hand firmly before leaving the diner. The cold air outside hit me like a slap, but it cleared my thoughts. Harry hadn't just been cruel. He had been calculated, deliberate, and desperate. And if he thought he could steal my home, he was about to learn what it felt like when the tables turned. The courthouse in downtown Kalispell loomed over me as I climbed the stone steps that Monday afternoon. I had walked past that building 1,000 times in my career at the bank always, with the quiet respect of a man who believed in order and rules. But that day, I wasn't walking past. I was walking in with a folder tucked under my arm and a determination I hadn't felt in years. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. The clerk's office was tucked behind a glass partition, staffed by a woman in her 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the no-nonsense tone of someone who had processed every excuse under the sun. She looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, setting the property deed and documents on the counter. "I need to file an eviction notice." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "This is for a rental." "No," I said firmly. "It's for my own home. My daughter and her husband have been living there. I allowed them to stay, but they violated the terms of our agreement." "And what terms would those be?" "Mutual respect and contribution to household expenses," I replied without hesitation. "Both conditions have been broken." Repeatedly. She studied me for a long moment, then glanced at the deed in front of her. My name bold on the paper left no room for argument. With practiced motions, she stamped the forms and slid a copy back through the glass. 30-day notice period begins today. If they contest it, we'll schedule a hearing. If not, the sheriff will serve final papers once the deadline passes. Her words settled over me like a gavel strike. For years, I had shouldered the responsibility of their bills, convinced myself that enabling was love. But standing there, I realized I was finally using the law the way it was meant to be used, not as a weapon, but as a shield. "When will they be served?" I asked. "Sheriff's Department usually handles it within 48 hours. I nodded, thanked her, and stepped back into the crisp afternoon air. For the first time since leaving the house, I felt the weight of legal authority behind me. I wasn't just a father cutting off financial support. I was the property owner, and the law was on my side. As I walked back to the motel, I thought about the hardwood floors Martha and I had refinished, together the kitchen she had filled with laughter, the garden where Tiffany had once chased fireflies. Those memories belonged to me, not to a man who treated me like a servant, and certainly not to a son-in-law who had tried to forge papers to steal it. That night I sat in my motel room with the eviction documents beside me, the sheriff's copy already on its way. I felt no triumph, no gloating, just a steady calm. Harry had played games with forged papers and false authority. I had answered with the truth and with the law doesn't flinch. The morning after filing the eviction, I walked into the Flathead County Police Department. The building smelled faintly of burnt coffee and copier ink, a scent I knew too well from years of balancing budgets and filing reports. But today wasn't about spreadsheets or mortgages. It was about protection mine and what was left of my dignity. Detective Jim Morrison's office was tucked in the back corner, crowded with filing cabinets and stacks of case files. Jim had aged since I last saw him, more gray in his hair, deeper creases around his eyes, but his handshake was as steady as ever. We had once served together on the church building committee, and I knew him as a man who valued facts over gossip. "Clark," he said, motioning me into a chair. "What brings you in?" I laid it out plainly, the ultimatum, the eviction filing, and Bob Harrison's revelation about Harry's forged loan papers. Jim listened without interruption, jotting notes in a battered notebook. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "Your son-in-law's name has come across my desk more than once," Jim said. Mostly whispers. Glacier Peak's casino poker tables. He's a regular there. Plays higher stakes than he can handle. The words hit like cold water. "How much are we talking?" Jim flipped through a folder. Between 18 and 20,000 across different creditors. Some legitimate banks, small lenders, others. Let's just say they don't file paperwork when they want repayment. My stomach tightened. For years I had been plugging holes in Tiffany and Harry's finances, thinking I was keeping their lives afloat. All the while, Harry had been burning through money I never even knew about. "Is he in immediate danger?" I asked. "Depends what you call danger. He's been stalling for about 6 weeks. Most creditors give 3 months before they escalate. If he doesn't find a way to cover those debts soon, someone's going to come knocking. And not politely." I pressed a hand against my chest, steadying my breath. It all made sense now, the arrogance, the ultimatum, the smug belief that I was his to command. Harry wasn't just a disrespectful son-in-law. He was a desperate man cornered by debts, and I had been his lifeline. "Jim," I said quietly, "what happens if they try to drag me into it, claim the house, claim I'm responsible?" Jim's eyes hardened. "That's why you did the right thing filing eviction. Cuts off any pretense he has. And if he tries intimidation, we'll have grounds to act." "But Clark," he leaned forward, his voice firm, "you need to understand something. A man in his position won't go down quietly. He'll thrash, he'll lie, he'll grab at whatever leverage he can find. Be ready." I nodded, though the weight of it pressed heavily on my shoulders. As I left the station, I thought about Martha's photo tucked safely in my suitcase. She always told me that truth was the strongest weapon. Harry's lies were piling up, but the truth was beginning to stack higher. And if he wanted to gamble, he was about to learn what happens when the house finally plays by the rules. By Friday afternoon, it seemed as though the entire town had caught wind of my situation, without me ever needing to say a word. Kalispell wasn't a big city. It was the kind of place where everyone knew who was late on their mortgage, and who bought a new truck before they could afford it. I stopped by Miller's Hardware, where I had worked part-time after retiring, just to pick up a few screws for a loose hinge at the motel. The moment I walked through the door, 3 employees looked up from the counter, their faces painted with surprise and concern. "Clark heard you're staying out at Pine Lodge, Tom Kowalski," the owner said, setting down his clipboard. "What's going on?" I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to protect Tiffany, to shield her from embarrassment. But then I remembered the ultimatum serve or leave and Harry's smug expression when I chose to pack. They had thrown away the right to my protection. "They asked me to leave my own house," I said evenly. "I decided it was best for everyone if they handled their own responsibilities." Tom's jaw tightened. "After all you've done for them." The other employees gathered closer, and soon I found myself recounting pieces of the truth: the college tuition, the wedding costs, the mortgage payments. Shock and anger spread across their faces like a wildfire. "You paid for their college," Dave, the assistant manager, said in disbelief. "Harry told everyone Tiffany got a scholarship. He also claimed they covered the mortgage themselves," Sarah added, shaking her head. "Said he was helping you since you were on a fixed income." I almost laughed at the irony. For years I had thought of myself as invisible, the quiet provider behind the scenes. But apparently Harry had built an entire mythology around himself, one where I was the helpless dependent, and he was the savior. Now the truth was tearing that story apart. By the time I left the hardware store, I knew the facts would travel faster than any newspaper headline. In a small town, you didn't need to shout the truth. You only needed to whisper it to the right people. That evening, I stopped by St. Mark's Lutheran Church to speak with Pastor Williams. He had heard the rumors already, his brow furrowed with concern. "Clark, I want to hear it directly from you." "What happened?" I explained everything in measured tones. The years of support, the ultimatum, the eviction notice. He listened without judgment, his hands folded on the desk. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is step back and let others face the consequences of their choices. You've carried them long enough." Walking back to the motel, I felt the weight shift. It wasn't just me against Harry anymore. The community knew. The mask he had worn for years was crumbling, and no amount of smooth talk would glue it back together. Harry thought he could twist reality to suit his needs, but in a town like ours, truth had a way of finding daylight, and once exposed, it spread faster than any lie. Saturday morning, a sharp knock rattled the thin motel door. Through the peephole, I saw them both, Tiffany in a wrinkled sweater, her eyes rimmed red, and Harry standing stiff, his jaw set in that familiar mixture of arrogance and panic. I opened the door but didn't step aside. The narrow frame became my shield. "Dad," Tiffany whispered, her voice cracking. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked evenly. Harry pushed forward, his shoulders squared like he still believed he could intimidate me. "About the fact that you've lost your damn mind. You cut off the mortgage, the insurance, everything. You're trying to ruin us over some stupid fight about a beer." I let the words hang in the stale air between us before replying. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm simply no longer paying for your lives." Tiffany's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, please. You can't just stop without warning. We have bills, responsibilities." "You mean the bills I've been covering for 5 years?" I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "You gave me an ultimatum, Tiffany. Do what Harry says or leave." I chose to leave. Her lips parted as if she wanted to deny it, but the truth hung too heavy. She had said those words, and we both knew it. Harry stepped closer, lowering his tone as if he could bargain his way through. "Look, we all said things we didn't mean. But this is serious. Our home, our credit, everything's at risk. You can't just pull the rug out." I met his stare without flinching. I can. And I did. For the first time, his mask cracked. The bravado slipped, replaced by something raw fear. He glanced at Tiffany, waiting for her to back him up. But she stayed silent, her tears dripping down onto the sleeve of her sweater. "Dad," she whispered. "What about family? What about everything we've been through together?" I studied her face, searching for the little girl who once brought me dandelions from the yard. But all I saw was a grown woman standing beside a man who had manipulated her into betraying her own father. "Family works both ways," I said quietly. "I carried you both for years. When it was time to carry me, you chose him instead." Harry's composure snapped. "You crazy old bastard," I raised my hand, cutting him off. "If you raise your voice again, I'll call the police. This is private property, and you're disturbing the peace." For a moment, silence stretched thin as wire. Then Harry grabbed Tiffany's elbow. "Come on," he muttered. "We'll figure this out ourselves." They turned toward the parking lot. Tiffany looked back. Once her face pale and drawn, as if she were seeing me for the first time, not the pushover father she thought I was, but a man who had finally chosen dignity over servitude. I closed the door softly behind them and returned to my table where a stack of documents waited. This battle wasn't finished, but for the first time, I held the upper hand. The following week, my phone buzzed with a call from Detective Jim Morrison. His tone was measured, but the words made my stomach tighten. "Clark, I thought you should know Harry came in this morning. Filed a complaint against you." "Against me?" I asked, though I already suspected where this was going. "He's claiming elder abuse," Jim said flatly. "Says someone at the bank manipulated you into making bad financial decisions. He hinted you might not be in your right mind." For a moment, I just sat there in the motel chair, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Of all the stunts Harry could pull, this one cut the deepest. He wasn't content with bleeding me financially. Now he wanted to stain my name, to brand me incompetent in the eyes of the law. "What did you tell him?" I finally asked. Jim gave a short laugh, humorless. "That we'd need medical documentation and witness statements, which he obviously doesn't have. But I wanted you to be aware he's trying to create a record, build a narrative that you've lost control." I thanked him and hung up, gripping the phone until my knuckles whitened. The irony wasn't lost on me. 30 years at the bank, I had managed millions for clients' planned retirements, balanced complex accounts. Now my own son-in-law was trying to paint me as a senile old man, unfit to handle my own affairs. That evening, I sat at the diner, nursing a black coffee, thinking it through. Harry's desperation was escalating. The debts, the eviction, the cut-off funds, they were cornering him. And a cornered man will do anything to regain control. He couldn't win with forged papers, so now he was swinging with lies. A few townsfolk had already heard the rumors. Mrs. Henderson from church leaned across the booth, whispering, "Clark, is it true what Harry's been saying, that you've had episodes?" Her face was soft with concern, but the question still stung. "No," I said calmly, meeting her gaze. "I've never been sharper. He's spreading lies because I stopped paying his way." Her nod was slow, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I thought as much." "Don't worry, Clark. Folks around here know you too well to believe that kind of nonsense." Her reassurance mattered more than I wanted to admit. In a town like ours, reputation was currency. Harry thought he could bankrupt me with whispers. What he didn't understand was that 30 years of honesty carried more weight than his months of panic. Back at the motel, I opened my evidence file on the laptop, typing in a new entry, April 12th complaint, filed by Harry Thompson, alleging elder abuse. No evidence provided. Witness Detective Morrison. Documenting it calmed me. Harry could invent whatever stories he wanted, but I had facts. Dates, confirmation numbers, and facts had a way of outlasting lies. As I shut the computer for the night, I realized something important. Harry wasn't just fighting me for money anymore. He was fighting for survival, and the more desperate he grew, the uglier his tactics would become. The phone rang late on a Tuesday evening. I glanced at the screen. Tiffany. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail like all the others. But something in me, maybe the father who still remembered bedtime stories and scraped knees, made me swipe the screen. Dad, her voice was thick with tears, breath hitching as though she'd been crying for hours. Please, you have to listen. I'm pregnant. I froze. Pregnant. The words slammed into me like a freight train. She let it hang there waiting for me to react, waiting for the soft-hearted father she had always counted on to cave. Congratulations, I said slowly. When did you find out? Last week, she sniffled. But the stress. Dad, the doctor says if things don't calm down, I could lose the baby. Please, we need help. You always said family comes first. What about your grandchild? Her words were sharp hooks baited with guilt. For a brief second, my chest ached with that familiar pull, the instinct to protect, to give, to sacrifice. But then I heard Martha's voice in my memory, calm and steady. Love doesn't mean blind obedience. It means truth, even when it hurts. I tightened my grip on the phone. Which doctor told you this? There was a pause. Too long. Dr. Richards. At the women's clinic. I knew Dr. Richards. She had treated Martha for years, a woman of integrity, who would never invent a crisis to shake money loose. Good, I said evenly. I'll call her office in the morning and ask about covering medical expenses directly. Dad, no, you can't just call my doctor. That's private. Her voice sharpened, slipping from sorrow to anger in an instant. You're right, I replied, calm as ever. She can call me instead and I'll arrange payment if there's a genuine emergency. The line went silent. Then with a sharp click, she hung up. I sat there for a long while, the hum of the motel air conditioner filling the silence. Pregnant, she said. Maybe it was true. Maybe it wasn't. But the timing, the sudden tears, the attempt to steer me back into the role of blank check, it all smelled of desperation, not truth. The next morning, I followed through. I called Dr. Richards' office, explained who I was, and asked if Tiffany had been seen recently. The receptionist put me on hold for a few minutes, then returned. Mr. Miller, I can't disclose details, but I can confirm we have no patient by that name scheduled this week. I thanked her and hung up, my suspicions confirmed. Tiffany's tears had been theater, her pregnancy a script meant to tug at my weakest spot. I opened my evidence file and added another entry, April 13th. Tiffany claimed pregnancy with complications. Verified false with Dr. Richards' office. It hurt to write those words. Hurts deeper than Harry's insults, deeper than the eviction process. Because this wasn't just my daughter siding with her husband. It was her weaponizing the idea of my grandchild to drag me back into servitude. But instead of pulling me in, it hardened my resolve. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They would soon learn silence can be sharper than any blade. 2 days later, I walked downtown to deposit a small check at First National. The air was crisp, the kind that smelled faintly of pine and snowmelt, and for a fleeting moment I felt almost normal, like any retiree running errands. That illusion shattered as soon as I reached the steps of the bank. A crowd had gathered near the entrance, heads turned toward a familiar voice, raised louder than it needed to be. Harry. He stood on the top step, gesturing wildly, his voice sharp and theatrical. He's lost his mind, he declared, pointing toward the street as if I weren't already within earshot. My wife's pregnant, and the old fool kicked us out of the house. He's senile, doesn't know what he's doing, abandoned his own family. The faces in the crowd turned toward me as I approached. Some looked confused, others pitying. For a moment, I felt a flicker of shame until I remembered Detective Morrison's words. Harry will thrash. He'll lie, he'll grab at whatever leverage he can find. I stepped up onto the sidewalk, my voice calm but loud enough to carry. $18,000, I said. The crowd fell silent. Harry spun around, his face flushed. What are you babbling about? 18,000, I repeated. That's how much you owe in gambling debts at Glacier Peaks Casino. Mostly poker, isn't it? Detective Morrison has the records. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman near the front whispered, Poker, I thought he said he was working overtime. Harry's bluster faltered. He's crazy, he stammered, his voice rising to a pitch that betrayed his fear. Don't listen to him. I took another step forward, holding the bank envelope loosely in my hand. I've got documentation of every dollar I spent supporting you for the last 5 years. Mortgage, utilities, car insurance, groceries. Can you show us where your paycheck went? Or should we ask the casino? The murmurs grew louder, the weight of doubt shifting against him. Harry's face turned from red to purple sweat, beading at his temple. He stepped closer, trying to loom over me like he always had in the living room. You senile old bastard, you can't just... I raised my hand, cutting him off. This town knows me, Harry. They've known me 30 years. They know my work, my character, my honesty. All they've ever known from you are lies, and now they know why. The silence was absolute. Even the cars passing on Main Street seemed to hush. Harry's jaw worked as if he wanted to say more, but nothing came out. Finally, with a growl, he pushed through the crowd, muttering curses. People stepped aside, some shaking their heads, others pulling out their phones to type faster than gossip could travel. I watched him retreat down the street, his swagger gone, replaced by the hunch of a man who knew the truth was no longer his to twist. Then I turned, walked into the bank, and deposited my check like any ordinary man. But I wasn't ordinary anymore. I was a man who had finally spoken out, and the town had listened. That night I was reading in the motel room when a faint commotion outside pulled me from the page. At first I thought it was just the muffled laughter of travelers returning from the diner down the street. But then came a low, angry voice I knew too well. I set the book aside, stood quietly, and peered through the curtains. Harry. He was pacing in the parking lot, his movements sharp and erratic like a man with no place left to stand. His voice rose, echoing against the cinderblock walls of the Pine Lodge. Old fool thinks he can ruin me, thinks he can humiliate me in front of the whole town. I'll teach him a lesson. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He wasn't just venting, he was threatening. And he was doing it outside my door. A knock followed hard, 3 sharp pounds that rattled the thin wood. Clark, he barked. Come out here and face me. I stayed silent. My phone in my hand, my finger hovering over Detective Morrison's number. The motel's night manager, Steve Brennan, must have heard the racket too, because within minutes, his voice cut through the tension. Harry, you need to leave. Right now. Through the peephole, I saw Steve step into the glow of the parking lot, light his arms crossed with the kind of authority only a retired Army sergeant could carry. Harry turned on him, chest puffed out, but Steve didn't budge. You're disturbing guests, Steve said flatly, and I've already got you on the security cameras. If you don't leave in the next 30 seconds, I'm calling the sheriff. Harry's face twisted with fury, but he must have seen the steadiness in Steve's stance. He spat something under his breath, then stomped toward his truck and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. A moment later, the engine roared and the headlights swept across the motel walls as he sped off into the night. I opened the door, slowly stepping out into the cool air. Steve met me halfway, his expression calm but firm. "You all right, Mr. Miller?" "I am, thanks to you," I said quietly. He nodded. "Got the whole thing on video. Him pacing, yelling, pounding on your door, making threats. Sheriff will want to see it." Relief washed through me, mixed with a grim satisfaction. For weeks I had been documenting Harry's lies and manipulations. Now I had something even stronger, evidence of intimidation caught on camera. Back in my room, I sat at the desk, opened my evidence file, and wrote down every detail while it was fresh. April 16th. Harry Thompson appeared at Pine Lodge, shouting threats, pounding on my door. Witness Steve Brennan, security footage available. As I finished, I felt the knot in my chest loosen just a little. Harry thought fear would drive me back under his thumb. Instead, he had just handed me another weapon, the law. Tomorrow, I would bring the footage to Detective Morrison, and this time Harry wouldn't just be battling whispers or debts. He would be battling the very system he thought he could outsmart. The next morning, I walked into the police station with Steve Brennan's USB drive tucked safely in my pocket. The waiting area smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee, a mix that told me plenty of long nights were spent here. Detective Jim Morrison met me at the counter, his expression serious but welcoming. "Clark," he said, leading me back to his office. "You've got something for me." I handed him the drive and my written timeline. Security footage, witness statement, everything from last night. He was outside my door yelling threats. Steve's willing to testify. Jim slid the drive into his computer. Within minutes, the grainy black and white footage played across the screen. There was Harry pacing like a caged animal, shouting loud enough for the whole motel to hear. Then the pounding on my door, his voice carrying words like, "Teach him a lesson." The evidence was damning. Jim leaned back in his chair. "This shows a clear pattern of intimidation, Clark. Combined with the scene at the bank and what I've witnessed myself, we've got grounds for a restraining order. He won't be able to come within 500 feet of you or your property." The words steadied me. For weeks, Harry had barked and blustered, trying to push me into fear. Now the law was beginning to put real distance between us. But Jim wasn't finished. He opened a file folder and pushed it toward me. "There's something else you need to know." Friday, Harry consulted with a lawyer about adverse possession laws. I frowned. Squatters' rights? Exactly. In Montana, it requires 5 years of hostile occupation. He was researching whether he could file a claim on your house once that mark hit. He's been living there 3 years already. If you hadn't stepped in now, he would have tried to make it his legally. The air in the room seemed to tighten. "Does he have any legitimate claim?" I asked. "None," Jim said firmly. Adverse possession requires hostile occupation, meaning you didn't give permission. You allowed them to live there. They never paid rent or taxes. Legally, he has no footing. But the fact he was planning it shows intent. Premeditation. I sat back, the weight of it settling in my bones. All those years I thought I was helping Tiffany start her life. I had been feeding a man who was quietly laying the groundwork to steal the very roof over my head. The ultimatum, the forged papers, the gambling debts, it all pointed to the same truth. Harry hadn't just wanted my money. He had wanted my life dismantled piece by piece. Jim's voice broke through my thoughts. "We'll fast-track the restraining order. By this afternoon, it'll be signed by a judge. If Harry comes near you or your house, we'll arrest him on the spot." I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Jim." Walking out of the station, I felt a strange calm. The man who had once lounged in my recliner, ordering me around like a servant, was now cornered. His lies had been exposed, his intimidation documented, and his last desperate scheme unraveled before it began. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking forward. By Monday morning, I knew it was time to turn Harry's own lies into his undoing. For weeks, he had lived under the illusion that my house, my accounts, even my name could serve as his shield against the consequences of his gambling. If he listed my address on every application, if he let the town believe I was still backing him, then maybe the wolves would circle but never bite. That illusion ended today. I spread my notes across the motel desk, account numbers, creditor names, collection agencies. Years in banking had taught me one unshakable truth. Paper trails matter. Harry's paper trail led straight back to me, but I could redirect it with a few carefully placed calls. The first number I dialed belonged to Frontier Financial Services. A man named Marcus Webb answered, his voice clipped and professional. Frontier Financial Collections Department. "This is Clark Miller," I said. "I'm returning your call about Harry Thompson. He listed my address on his credit application. I need to make something clear. Harry has no legal claim to my home, and he no longer resides there. If you're looking for him, he works at Mountain View Auto on Highway 93. There was silence, then the sound of typing. "Understood, Mr. Miller. We'll update the file. Thank you." The second call went to Continental Credit Recovery. The process was the same: name clarification correction. Each conversation was short, factual, and left a digital trail proving I had severed responsibility. One by one, I stripped away the false cover Harry had built around himself. By noon, I had called 6 agencies. Some were polite, others brusque, but all updated their records. Each time I hung up, I felt lighter, as if one more weight had been lifted from my chest. For years, I had been Harry's shield. Now I was holding up a mirror, forcing his creditors to see exactly who owed them. I leaned back in the motel chair, letting out a long breath. I could picture it already: phone calls flooding into Mountain View Auto debt collectors showing up at the dealership. Harry's carefully polished facade cracking under the pressure. The man who had strutted through my living room demanding beer was about to learn what it meant when his lies collapsed in on themselves. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and updated the evidence file. April 20th calls placed to 6 creditors. Clarified: Harry Thompson has no legal claim to property at 847 Pine Street. Provided current employer information. The record was neat, tidy, undeniable. I closed the file, poured myself a cup of motel coffee, and stood by the window. Outside, an elderly couple loaded luggage into their car, working together in quiet rhythm. Watching them, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Harry had mistaken my silence for weakness. What he never understood was that silence can be strategy. And now, with every call I made, I wasn't just cutting him off, I was letting the truth do the work. It didn't take long for the consequences to catch up with him. 2 days after I made the calls, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. On the other end was Mike Brennan, owner of Mountain View Auto. I'd known Mike for 20 years. He was a straight shooter, the kind of man who built his dealership on reputation and handshakes. "Clark," he said, his tone heavy. "I need to ask you something directly. Is what I'm hearing about Harry true?" I didn't answer immediately. "What exactly did he say?" Mike sighed. "He's been telling people you threw him and Tiffany out because you're losing your mind. Said there's some kind of medical emergency in the family you refuse to help with. He's painting you as a bitter old man who abandoned his pregnant daughter." I felt my jaw tighten. There is no pregnancy, no emergency, and my mind is as sharp as it ever was. What there is, Mike, are gambling debts. $18,000, mostly at Glacier Peaks Casino. Ask Detective Morrison if you need verification. And what there is 5 years of me paying their bills while he lied to everyone about who was supporting who. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the pieces clicking into place on Mike's end. Finally, he exhaled. I was afraid of that. Clark, 3 customers came in yesterday, asking if Harry was good for money. One said he recognized him at the casino. That kind of talk spreads fast. I can't afford to have my dealership tied to someone like that. I'm going to have to let him go. I understand, I said. And I did. In business, reputation was oxygen. Once it turned toxic, nothing survived. Mike's voice softened. I'm sorry it's come to this. You didn't deserve any of it. After we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the motel wall. I thought of Harry swaggering around in his work shirts, boasting about closing deals when in truth, he'd been bleeding me dry to cover his bets. The job at Mountain View had been his last semblance of legitimacy. Now even that was gone. Later that afternoon, I drove past the dealership on Highway 93. From across the lot, I saw Harry storming out of the office, his face crimson, his fists clenched. Mike followed behind, at a distance calm but firm, a paper envelope in hand. Severance, maybe. Or just a final paycheck. Harry ripped the envelope in half before he even reached his truck, tossing the pieces onto the asphalt. I pulled into the diner nearby and watched through the window as he sat in his truck, head in his hands. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Harry had spent years thinking he could control me, manipulate Tiffany, and bluff his way through town. But lies only last until the truth shows up. And the truth had arrived in the form of creditors, community whispers, and now unemployment. Harry wasn't just losing control, he was losing the very identity he had built on my back. And I hadn't raised a finger in anger. I had simply stepped aside and let gravity do its work. The call came just after sunset. I was sitting by the motel window, sipping the last of my lukewarm coffee when Tiffany's name flashed across the screen again. For a moment, I considered ignoring it the way I had so many times before. But something told me to answer. Her voice trembled. Dad, please. I don't know what to do. Harry lost his job today. The phone won't stop ringing, debt collectors, banks, people we don't even know. They're at the house asking about assets, about income. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I don't know how to fix it. I listened silent, letting her words spill out like water through a broken dam. For years, I had jumped in to patch every leak before she drowned. Not this time. When she paused, waiting for me to rescue her, I finally spoke. I'll give you one chance, Tiffany. I said, my voice steady. One chance to end this with dignity. Her breath caught. What do you mean? I mean full disclosure. You stand before this community, the church, the Tribune, even your own friends online, and you tell the truth. You tell them exactly how much I sacrificed. Tuition, wedding, mortgage, groceries, insurance, all of it. And you tell them the truth about Harry. The lies end with you. There was silence on the line and then a sob. Dad, you want me to humiliate myself in front of everyone? No, I replied. I want you to tell the truth. There's a difference. People will think you had a father who loved you enough to sacrifice everything for your happiness, and that you threw it away until it was gone. Her voice wavered. What about Harry? Harry is no longer part of any equation that involves me, I said sharply. He has a restraining order. He has debts. He made his choices. This is between you and me now. If you want any hope of rebuilding trust, it starts with honesty. She sniffled, her breathing uneven. You're asking me to choose between my husband and my father. No, I said firmly. I'm asking you to choose between lies and truth. Between continuing down Harry's path of ruin or stepping into the light where people will see who you really are. Her silence stretched, long broken only by the faint sound of her crying. I didn't rush to fill the space. Finally, she whispered, "And if I can't do it, then you'll live with the consequences of that choice. Harry will run men like him always do when things get hard. You can go with him or you can stay and face the truth. But if you want any relationship with me, it starts in front of the whole community." When the call ended, I stared at the darkened window, my own reflection staring back. It hurt to set conditions for my own daughter, but enabling her had already cost me too much. If she wanted my forgiveness, she would have to earn it, not with words, but with the courage to stand in the truth. Sunday morning arrived crisp and cold, the kind of air that stung your lungs but cleared your thoughts. I walked slowly toward St. Mark's Lutheran, my hands tucked in my coat pockets, unsure if Tiffany would show. The church bell rang, its echo spilling across town like a reminder that truth always has a way of coming to light. The sanctuary was fuller than usual. Word had spread, people had heard whispers of some announcement, and small towns never passed up the chance to witness drama dressed as confession. I slipped into my usual pew 3 rows from the front, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. Pastor Williams began with familiar hymns, his voice steady, but I barely heard the words. My eyes kept drifting toward the back of the room. Then she stood. Tiffany's steps echoed against the wooden floor as she walked down the aisle, each one smaller than the confident strides she once carried as a bride. She reached the podium, gripped the sides with trembling hands, and looked out at faces she had known all her life. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried to every corner of the room. "I need to tell you all something about my father." She paused, drawing in a shaky breath. "For the past 5 years, he has supported Harry and me financially. He paid for my college $160,000 when I could have gone to a state school. He paid for my wedding $25,000 when Harry's family couldn't afford their share. He even paid for our home. The down payment, the mortgage, the insurance, the groceries, everything. And all of it while living on Social Security." A ripple moved through the congregation, hushed gasps and murmurs. These weren't vague claims. These were numbers, sacrifices, undeniable facts. Tiffany's voice grew stronger, as if the truth itself steadied her. 3 weeks ago, when my father wouldn't follow Harry's orders like a servant, we gave him an ultimatum: obey or leave his own house. My father chose to leave rather than surrender his dignity. I stood by and let it happen. I chose loyalty to my husband over loyalty to the man who raised me with love and patience, and I was wrong. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't falter. My father deserved gratitude and respect. Instead, we gave him ultimatums and demands. I'm standing here because he offered me one last chance to choose truth over pride. And today, I choose truth. Silence blanketed the sanctuary. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. Pastor Williams placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes glistening. Sometimes the hardest courage is admitting when we are wrong. Tiffany has shown us that courage today, and her father has shown us what dignity looks like under pressure. I sat in the pew, my throat tight, my eyes burning. Around me, neighbors whispered words of support, some reaching out to touch my shoulder. But all I could see was Tiffany at the podium, finally shedding Harry's shadow, finally choosing the truth. 3 months later, I stood in the front yard of the house that had once been my pride, and then my prison. The grass was freshly cut, the flower beds replanted with bright marigolds and tulips, and the sound of children's laughter carried across the yard. It didn't feel like mine anymore, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The Montana Veterans Housing Initiative had taken the property and transformed it into 3 transitional apartments. Families who had known real sacrifice, not manufactured entitlement, now filled the rooms. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos recently returned from deployment, guided her two young children toward a small playground donated by local businesses. She looked at me with tired but grateful eyes. "Mr. Miller, this opportunity means everything to us. We've been on waiting lists for months. Having a roof over our heads, a place safe for my kids, it's a blessing." I nodded, my throat tight. This house should serve people who understand what it means to give, not just take. You and your children have earned that. As she turned to help her daughter onto the swing, I looked back at the porch where Tiffany used to sit with Martha, sipping lemonade on hot summer evenings. For a moment, the weight of memory pressed down on me. But then I heard laughter again. Real laughter, innocent and untainted by greed. It replaced the sorrow with something cleaner, something closer to peace. I no longer thought of this house as something to leave behind for Tiffany. That chapter had closed. Instead, it had become a legacy for families who knew the value of dignity and sacrifice. I'd already updated the deed, witnessed, signed, and filed. There was no going back, and I felt no regret. My own life had shifted into a quieter rhythm. I bought a small lakeside cabin, nothing fancy but enough. Mornings with coffee on the deck, afternoons fishing in Flathead Lake, evenings with a book and the comfort of silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't working overtime to clean up someone else's mess. I was living my own life. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Tiffany. "Dad, I've started counseling. 3 months in, and I'm learning what a healthy relationship really means. Could we meet for coffee sometime? I want to earn back your trust, one step at a time." I stared at the words, feeling the ache of all that had been lost and the fragile hope of what might be rebuilt. She had stood at the church, confessed her failures publicly, and had filed for divorce from Harry soon after he fled town. Now she was reaching out not for money, not for rescue, but for something far harder: forgiveness. I typed back slowly, deliberately. "Coffee sounds good. Saturday morning at the diner." Setting the phone aside, I looked at the veterans' families moving and the children's laughter echoing across the yard. Justice had been served, dignity preserved. And perhaps in time a daughter might truly learn what it means to rebuild love on the foundation of truth. Looking back, I realized the hardest battles aren't fought with fists or lawyers. They're fought in the quiet moments, when you choose dignity over humiliation, truth over lies, boundaries over blind sacrifice. For years, I believed that love meant giving everything, even when it cost me my peace. But what my daughter and her husband taught me is that unchecked generosity becomes a leash others will gladly tighten around your neck. In the end, the house wasn't lost. It was reborn. It no longer served as a stage for entitlement, but as a haven for veterans who understood the meaning of sacrifice. Watching those families settle in reminded me that legacies aren't about bloodlines. They're about values. Tiffany's public confession at church proved that even broken relationships can begin again, but only when honesty replaces manipulation. And though forgiveness comes easily, trust must be rebuilt brick by brick. If you're a parent who's caring too much for ungrateful children, I hope my story urges you to pause. Ask yourself, are you helping them grow, or are you keeping them from ever standing on their own? Now I want to ask you, have you ever lived through something like I did? Have you been forced to draw a line with family to protect your dignity? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your journey. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it. Thank you for listening.